Hi, everyone. Welcome to the VeriDAO channel. I'm Lisa Davis, and recently there was the big meeting in Johannesburg with the BRICS nation, and we wanted to hear Reggie Middleton's thoughts and get some questions from the community. So we're going to share that with you right after this. Welcome to the channel, Reggie. Thanks so much for making some time for us.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody.
Good to have you. We recently, there was a meeting in Johannesburg with the 14th Summit of the Heads of State Government of the BRICS, and it was held August 22nd through the 24th. I guess there were 40 countries expressed interest in joining. Out of that, 23 countries submitted formal applications to join the bloc. Of that, BRICS leaders selected 6: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. Kind of leading up to that, did you have any expectations going into that BRICS meeting?
I did not. I am a student of global macroeconomics from an investment and curious what to know what's going on in the world perspective. But I'm far from an expert. That's my early humor. I was asked for my personal opinion, and I'll give it to you. That doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about. I'm an expert or even smart. And I'm telling you, I'm not upfront. I will say I'm much more adept at this than many of those who are writing articles that much of the cryptosphere is following in the financial world. But, just because I'm not as slow as others doesn't mean I'm fast. I don't know, I'm not an expert in this stuff. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that disclaimer, but I also appreciate you giving us your time and your perspective on this. Was there one big takeaway or anything that stood out to you from the meeting last week?
Well, I didn't watch the meeting. I looked at some of the media reports, and of interest, they allowed in a lot of additional oil exporters. I'm sorry. The UAE, which includes Abu Dhabi, they have a lot of additional industries that were rich in natural resources, such as Argentina, South Africa. So that's of interest. But it's also a double-edged sword. What a lot of people are discussing in the media outlets are reporting, usually until only one side of the story, such as bringing South Africa, Argentina, etc. You do get a lot gold and natural resources, but a lot of countries who are highly dependent upon commodity exports usually have volatile revenues and inflation issues. And inflation is a real issue. So to get the truth, you have to adjust GDP by inflation to get real GDP. When you do that, it tells a different story than what a lot of people are counting in terms of nominal GDP. So saying that if you take the new accepted applicants of the BRICS, and it amounts to X% of world GDP. Well, first you have to normalize it for inflation, and then you get a different number and you get a different story.
Interesting. Yeah, because the numbers we were seeing, as we were doing research for this, Reuters was reporting 80% of the world oil production and 30% of the world GDP were going to be part of this new addition. Mm-hmm. And so, that sent a lot of panic into people. How does that affect the US dollar and energy prices? What would you see with that?
Well,
so you're saying there would be an adjustment in that number.
Right. I sent a pie chart up to include.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I quickly ran through numbers, but I did it myself versus having my analysts do it. So, I'm not going to do as much work as they do because they're better at doing a lot of work than I am. But it gives you an adjusted perspective. I named it something that's, I guess, more akin to what a layperson would perceive these trading blocks to be, not necessarily what they're called. And the U.S. portion is probably understated because I didn't include all U.S. Primary trading partners. I just included three or four, but the big ones.
Okay.
So, for one, when you adjust for inflation all the way across the board, the U.S. actually gains world GDP uh, tranche versus loses it. The loser would be Europe. Okay, so these BRIC nations are taking from Europe or the European Union bloc as a group relative will take it from the US. The US is gaining on both of them. Okay. And now when you look at it
Interesting.
just for inflation, you have to adjust for inflation all around to begin with, but you also have to look at trends because inflation doesn't sit still. Inflation is an ongoing occurrence. You have to look at trends. If you look at the trends, inflation has exploded in certain portions of the BRICS bloc, but the large portions of the BRICS bloc, some of them, it's going in the opposite direction. You have deflation. Deflation is usually over time coupled with stagnating economic growth. So the biggest member of that bloc is who?
The U.S.
No,
I believe the U.S.
the biggest member of the BRICS bloc is who?
Oh, the BRICS. That would be
Economic.
the Russia, Brazil, Russia. Is that what you're talking about? I'm sorry. The
Let's say so.
BRICS group.
I quiz because I'm just, you know, I always wanted to be a teacher. That's probably the problem. So excuse me.
Sorry, and yeah, I need the teaching.
Yeah. So China has the largest economy. Russia
Oh,
is the
China.
biggest in
Yes, that
terms of
makes
land
sense. I'm
mass.
sorry.
Yeah. Russia is the biggest in terms of land mass. China is the biggest in terms of population and economy.
Economy.
China
Okay.
drives that block, right? China, like Japan back in the 80s, in the early 90s, has seen rampant fire, bomb economic growth. That economic growth in terms of a lot of profligate spending, okay? And for any children or high schoolers or just people who are not used to fancy words that nobody has any business using, I'm going to just throw these words out. Okay, so the profligate spending causes a lot of bad loans, a lot of bad investments. They tend to build up over time. The people who measure these, the people who follow these metrics and tabulate these metrics often ignore the bad spending, the non-performing assets, non-performing liabilities, the non-performing loans. They build up and eventually things pop because nobody gets paid back. That's what happened in Japan after its big, boom in the 80s and early 90s. That happened in China. People are measuring China's potential growth in the future based upon its bubble um, angulation in terms of growth, and not median or normalized rate of growth. And you have to do a normalized rate of growth because you have boom, bust, boom, bust. China's about to go into a bust. It's deflationary. That deflationary, um, the deflationary environment in China will most likely be a precursor to slower economic growth, particularly slower than the baseline it's had before. Now, China has a couple other things that are not working in its favor. Um, they had the largest population in the world, okay, and one of the youngest working or the largest working size population. That worked in their favor because they have very, very low wages. There are a lot of poor people, okay. They created a massive middle class. I say middle class because that's very
Mm-hmm.
misleading. If you look at my other videos, there's only two classes: working class and capitalist class, or capitalist class and other. But that's a different conversation. And they, blew up in terms of world ranking after joining the um, the what's the world organization?
WHO or WEF?
The World Economic Forum, WEF. No,
Yes,
yeah,
WEF.
World something. I didn't get a lot of sleep, everybody. So China joined the world stage. Okay, they were
Yes.
accepted. A trade, went gangbusters. They had the people to actually do the work. They became the world's manufacturer. And then China, centrally planned government, decided to centrally plan its growth, its civilization, its population. And so they put a limit on the amount of children that were allowed.
Right.
Socially, families wanted males versus females because there was more status and stature. And that's all fine and dandy, except for the fact that, and again, I'm not super intelligent. I'm not a biology professor. But last I noticed, men were very bad at having children. So if you limit the amount of women and the amount of people you have in a family, you're going to limit the future population. So now China's work age population is rapidly aging, and there's nobody to replace them because they limit the amount of children per family, and males are preferred over females. Males can't have babies. Okay, now you could have
Is
seen that coming, I think, with the male can have babies portion, but again, I'm not, a hyper intelligent, so maybe I was missing something. There are other nations who do have a very young workforce, and they have advantages of having a natural English speaking population. Nigeria is one. Nigeria is a large nation, okay, with a lot of um, citizens. They have one of the youngest workforces, and workforces. Is one of the youngest workforce is has one of the youngest workforce in the world, and it is rife with natural resources. Okay,
mm,
oil, gold, gas, bauxite, you know, um, food, etc. So you combine all that, and a nation like Nigeria looks ripe for growth. Of course, you have political struggles, um, but Nigeria is by far not on its own. You can look right across the Atlantic to the U.S. and D.C. So we all have our political issues. Um, Nigeria is not part of that block, though. So we discuss China. We go to Russia.
you
Russia
said
has the opposite problem.
India.
Okay, we could do
Okay.
India as well. Um,
Hmm.
let's do Russia, then India. So Russia has fairly deep double-digit inflation. I think it's like 13.77 to about 16%. That's very, very high. They're also embroiled in a war where much of the Western world has basically sided against Russia and made things very difficult for them. So they put a crimp on their economy. They um, econ- economically, or the equivalent of economically, sanctioned much of their financial transactions, high net worth individuals, etc. And at the same time, Russia is fighting a war in Ukraine. So Russia's economy is sliding, okay, relative to what it could be doing, or sliding period. It has very, very high inflation, and even their oil exports are limited. Then you have India. India, very large population, okay. India has relatively low inflation as I look at it, okay. And India has a lot of potential moving forward, except for, in my opinion, its bureaucracy and government regulations. It steps on its own feet and gets on its own way. If they can free the economy, allow money to go in and out freely with uh, minimal roadblocks, okay, in terms of regulation, India could take off. Again, with the English speaking populace. And why is English speaking so important? Because the largest economy in the world is English speaking, okay. I think English is the most predominant uh, language in the world globally, if I'm not mistaken. And largest financial system, English. You have
Hmm.
London, the UK. You have Wall Street, US. There's just a lot of advantages to having an English speaking population, native. Okay. So we didn't do Brazil. Brazil, again, highly dependent upon natural resources and commodities, particularly commodities. These commodities are volatile, which lead to volatile revenues. Consider revenues um, output from GDP. But Brazil has surprisingly low inflation. Now, when you look at inflation, right, you can't just look at a snapshot. You have to look at the trends. Another member of the BRICS would be the UAE. UAE has very low inflation. I think it's 2 point something percent, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm.
But the UAE is also a highly managed economy. And out of that 2 point something percent, um, it has a 300 or 3 or 4 digit increase. So it may be very low, but it exploded by, hundreds of percent from the year before. So if that rate were to continue anywhere near where it's been historically, then that's a negative. Okay. And I doubt very seriously if they can increase their GDP at the same rate they're increasing their inflation, which means their inflation adjusted GDP is going to die. or drop, not necessarily die. So we did Brazil, we did Russia, we did India, we did China, we did
China.
Argentina. Argentina, same thing. Fabian went through it before. We also have the South Africa. South Africa, again, right, highly reliant upon, they have a tech sector. Okay. China has an extreme tech sector, but China's tech sector is actually, because of the US politics, is being eschewed. So one of their biggest companies, and a big fan of their products, I am, Huawei, they made the best cell phones in the early 2010s. They made some of the best smartphones. The U.S. put the kibosh on that. They did. They were one of the leaders of 5G technology. U.S. put the kibosh on that, and now China is trying to buy up, um, rare earth um, elements, metals, trying to get around sanctions for semiconductor fabs and equipment to build on semiconductors, etc. This is basically economic war, U.S. versus China. Where it would end, I don't know, but China has a very, very strong technology sector. Okay, South Africa has a technology sector, so does India, but China is at the next level. Um, South Africa, again, you have gold, you have commodity exports, but South Africa's economy is relatively small compared to the big heavyweights. And then you have the new entrants. We discussed the UAE, Abu Dhabi with oil, um,
We talked
Dubai,
about Argentina.
yep, Argentina. Um, who else did I leave out?
So then Egypt, Ethiopia, and then the big ones, Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think, are the big
Right.
kind
So
of the heavy
Iran and
hitters
Saudi
in that.
Arabia, big oil producers. Okay. Egypt, less so, but on the map. If I'm not mistaken, Egypt has the largest securities exchange on the African continent. But
Really?
I think actual economic growth potential probably will go to Nigeria, which is the second largest. So it all depends on how you measure what the largest is. Okay. Um, the Now, as for big, and you were measuring big, you're probably measuring by, um, let me just check. You're probably measuring by oil production.
I
But
was thinking of oil production weight in the oil world because I'm still thinking petrodollar having so much weight in the world.
right, so let's take a look at. I had these blocks. I separated them out. Can you still see me on the camera, or did I go blank?
Yes. No, I can see you.
So Saudi Arabia has roughly $1 trillion adjusted for inflation and GDP. UAE has 472. Uh, Iran has 244 billion, and Ethiopia 156. So actual GDP output adjusted for inflation, Iran is actually rather low. Egypt is greater
Okay.
than Iran, both on a nominal and inflation adjusted basis. Uh, Iran is about twice what Ethiopia is. United Arab Emirates is 472, with Saudi Arabia being a billion. So Saudi Arabia is about twice UAE. Russia is 1.7 trillion. I said billion. 1.7 trillion.
Wow.
Brazil is above Russia and Saudi Arabia, okay, at 1.88 trillion. India is 3.3 trillion. This again is adjusted for inflation. And China is 18.9 trillion. So from a realistic perspective, you look at the numbers, Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest oil exporters, but Saudi Arabia is roughly 1/19th of China
Right.
and is almost one quarter of India. As a matter of fact, Saudi Arabia is nearly half of Brazil. So those entities that really count, $1 trillion and up, Saudi Arabia is at the bottom, then Russia, then Brazil, then India, then China. The real heavyweights, standalone heavyweights, from an economic perspective, are only China and India. Okay, now let's compare that to Europe, right? Europe, you have Germany, which is an economic powerhouse in the Eurozone. Germany, inflation adjusted is 3 trillion. France is 2.75 trillion. Italy, 2 trillion. Spain, 1.36 trillion. Netherlands $1 trillion, Turkey $1 trillion. Everybody beneath that is below $1 trillion. I actually attribute the UK, which is also a powerhouse, to what I call the US centric trading bloc, because I believe that the UK is a major, the US is the largest trading partner from a country perspective with the UK. The EU in general, as a bloc, is the larger trading partner than the US, in the UK. But allegiances and alliances between the UK and the US are inseparable. The UK were the original colonizers, and the US was simply the colonizers were spit out of the prisons and jails out of the UK back in 1400s, 1500s. Now, I may be using triggering language. I apologize, but I didn't write or make the history, so don't shoot the messenger. Okay. Now,
It's just
to
fact.
compare the numbers I gave you before to what I call the US centric trading bloc, you have the United States. Inflation adjusted GDP is 24.6 trillion, about $25 trillion. Japan, even though it's in Asia, right? Steady trading partner with the US. Third largest economy in the world, one of the largest banking systems, one of the best patent office. You could go on and on and on. Japan is $4.3 trillion. UK is 2.87 trillion. Canada, just under 2 trillion. South Korea, 1.682 trillion. And Mexico, 1.5 trillion. So the United States bloc, their smallest contributor partner, it would rank number 5 in the BRICS. Just to show you, anybody who thinks that BRICS are going to take over the world, if they are, they have a very long way to go. The US alone, the BRICS total inflation adjusted GDP is 28.834 trillion. The US by itself is 23.3 trillion. So the US alone can challenge the BRICS as an entire group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 countries. Okay.
And that's
Japan,
before sanctions.
right, and that's before. Well, it's
or the military.
sanctions, but yeah, when you factor that in, the numbers do change. But that takes a different analysis, and it's going to hurt a lot of people's feelings. So we'll go past that. Japan,
right, and we the people end up paying for it. I think in those cases,
you pay for everything. Who else is going to pay for it besides the people, right?
That's right.
Japan, who is the second largest trading partner, okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you take the EU total GDP, let's see if Japan is larger than every country in the EU in terms of inflation adjusted GDP, including Europe,
Wow.
including Germany. So the US is second. US's largest trading partner that I can see in terms of GDP is larger than every single country in the EU. So if you look at the trends, GDP growth, let me go back to where I can see the beautiful Lisa now. There we go. If you look at actual trends, I'm going to pull out of my, off of memory, so there may be some inaccuracies, but we're generalizing. If you look at actual trends, the BRICS are becoming more powerful, but that power in terms of GDP slice and chunks is coming from Europe. It's not coming from the American trading bloc or the Pan-Atlantic trading bloc, which is what I would call UK, Japan, Mexico, US, Canada. Okay, the US is getting stronger, actually, or the US and its trading partners are getting stronger. Where that ends, I don't know. Every single leader falls, because that's how you get new leaders. When they fall when they fall, and that's when they fall. Okay.
Oh my goodness, that changes a lot of my questioning. You always do this to me. Get my mind going in a totally different direction. But this is a time where, yeah. Exactly. But this is a time where things are changing. So one of the things they reported was that their plan was to back, and you had mentioned how there's this search for rare earth minerals. They're planning to back their currency with gold and other metals. There was a talk or an article that I read talking about that being like an interest paying asset denominated, resembling like an interest paying gold that would be like appealing to people in bond markets or things like that. Do you see um, the BRICS currency being appealing and effect having an effect on bond markets or people moving away from the debt based system to these at this asset backed
Well,
currency system?
those are a lot of questions, so let's do one at a time.
Those are
Throw
a
one
lot of
question at
questions.
me, and
Yeah.
I'll try and answer that one. Then I'll move forward.
Okay. Let me break this down apart. We were talking about the gold. They're talking about backing their currencies with gold back and other metals or rare earth minerals using, local currencies. Um, do you see this being appealing to people? Well, first of all, do you see it resembling an interest paying gold asset?
Well, if it's paying interest, then it's debt back. So it can't pay interest
Right.
and not be debt back. So you have to, you know, from a factual perspective. Now, the debt could be denominated in something other than US dollars, but debt is debt, you know. So you borrow something, you pay it back, whether it's collateralized or not, it's a debt. Um, the the practicality and sustainability of using um, local currencies that are not global reserve currency status uh, is questionable, in my opinion. Um, you can use you as an example. Um, let's assume you're excited, you're pro BRICS, anti US dollar, you're tired of the US dollar, etc. Um, you could put that to the test. How many real do you have in your portfolio or
I
your
have
bank
I
account?
have none.
None as in like
Zero.
zero? Rupees?
Zero.
Rupees?
Zero. Zero.
Um, rubles?
Zero.
Renminbi?
Not a one.
Rand?
None.
Okay. So using Lisa as an example, it's not going to happen anytime
That's
soon. But
practical.
Lisa is not necessarily a global macro currency investor or trader.
Right.
But let's assume they will succeed in doing this. These currencies are very volatile, particularly when traded against each other. So if they're priced, if you do a oil deal from Saudi Arabia, which Saudi uses, what's the Saudi currency? Okay, let's use UAE. Uh, Dirham is Dubai, and
Right.
what is the Abu Dhabi currency? Okay, I didn't get out of sleep. Okay,
You have got me. I would
Dubai
not
uses
know.
dirham. I can't remember the Abu Dhabi currency, but it may be dirham. But use local currencies. Okay, these
Hmm.
local currencies are volatile enough as they are. And Abu Dhabi, I mean, the UAE has very low inflation. They keep a pretty tight lid on that. But one way they do it is they have a lot of direct transfer payments to their citizens. The government makes a lot of cash from oil and tourism. Dubai is very volatile because of tourism. There are booms. It looks like Wakanda or Metropolis there. But when they go bust hard, and they have to borrow from
Mm.
the oil producing nations such as Abu Dhabi, you know, nominally maybe Qatar, etc., Bahrain. So they squash inflation by spending a lot of money directly into their populace. And so I think those inflation numbers nominally are accurate, but realistically, economically, I think they need a closer look. But let's assume that they are very low. Um, when they start buying their computers and their electronics and their oil and other products from China priced in renminbi, you're going to get much more volatility than in a dollar,
Right.
right? And you keep doing this, and then it's quite possible that things priced in dollars will be cheaper. If they're cheaper priced in dollars, no matter how much you hate the
They're not
US,
going to use it.
what are you going to end up buying? Go buy stuff in dollars,
They'll use dollars. Yeah.
which is going to bring the US back into the fold. People don't use the US dollar in global trade because they love the US, because the US is just all so benevolent. Everybody knows who created the atomic bomb and who's the first one to test it and the only one to burn a bunch of people and who, is one of the biggest colonizers in the world, et cetera, right? And they detest that, of course. They know that the US uses the US dollar and its sanctioning powers with an iron fist. But they don't really have much of a choice because it's cheaper to do business in US dollars. Now, if you have the wherewithal, the economic and the geopolitical might to pay more, right, just to use, not to use the US dollar, that's good for you, but you need for all your trading partners to have that economic and geopolitical will as well, and might. They don't have it. Arguably, nobody has it as a standalone, which is why the US dollar is currently the global reserve currency. And in case someone does develop the will, you also have to withstand the US military, whether it's the absolute guns they may shoot over, or bombs, or drones that may drop, certain intel, or social engineering through social media.
Yeah.
So,
And this is the information war is the
yeah,
fear that I'm hearing. I did hear in some of my research, I heard that there was a significance of the Shanghai Co-op organization was joining as part of BRICS, and I wasn't sure on the details of how that came to be, but that actually gave BRICS a military strength. Do you see um, us getting to the point of a military engagement over this issue?
well, I'm not familiar with the Shanghai Co-op. That's out
Okay.
of my purview, out of my depth. For all it could be a conspiracy theory or absolute fact, I have no idea, so I
Okay.
can't even opine. But China
Okay.
has been working in building their military capabilities significantly because they knew they'd probably end up having to use it or threaten to use it. The difference is China has the technology, right? They definitely have the manpower. They still have more citizens than any country in the world. But the US and Germany, or the UK, let's say the UK, and certain other nations have something that China does not have and will never be able to get without getting it, and that would be experience. Okay,
Mm.
when you go and fight a significant war, people get killed. Your people get killed, and you have to have the social and the political will to persist through that when those body bags start coming home. Okay, it's one thing to say we're going to do X, Y, Z. It's another thing when you have hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dead bodies wrapped in your country's flag. Okay, and then maintain a political will to continue to do this, particularly if you're doing something that your citizenship either doesn't understand or doesn't agree with,
Right.
or both.
Or is not behind.
Think about
Yeah.
the Vietnam War in the US. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, they had to stop because, you know, politicians need
There
votes.
wasn't the support.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and, the guerrillas probably did defeat the US on the ground. I don't know. I was very young if I was born at all. And, but uh, fighting in a jungle in your home territory is gives you a significant advantage. A and B, if the country doesn't want you there, the politicians have a very very short window to make something happen, and that short
Hmm.
window is probably too short to go on the ground in the jungle. I'm not a big advocate of war at all. I do believe it's a necessary evil for you to run the world, which is probably why I don't run the world. But it's not that simple. So I think a lot of people overlook the fact that China has not had a major military incursion that lasted a significant amount of time for a very, very long time, since
That's
before
true.
British occupation. And to be
That's a
truthful,
great
that's when
point.
they should have had it during British occupation, but different story. So,
Yeah. Um, back to talking about a little bit more about the currency that they were voting and kind of what they were talking about setting up, and that they were talking about using local currencies. Um, we talked a little bit about the difficulty with the convertibility of local currencies, and the volatility that people would experience with that. But if they were to implement distributed ledger technology and smart contracts to settle international trade, what would this look like your patents in action? And would these fall outside of the jurisdiction where your patents have been granted?
It may, and whether it falls inside or outside jurisdiction is a fairly complex legal discussion,
Okay.
which of course I've had between the left and right parts of my temple for quite some time, but I can't share that. Hey, I'm not a lawyer. One of the many other things I am not qualified to do, but I have been putting a lot of time and thought and um, my own expertise into it. I can say that applying DeFi concepts will increase efficiency significantly, but those gains in the efficiencies will be nullified in part by politics. Okay.
Okay.
So, it's like getting, I have a twin turbo V16 engine, but I still will have, my 5-inch wheels, which would simply burn up if I, hit the gas, past 200 or 300,000 RPM.
Goodness. How significant do you see this BRICS deal in the now and in the future? There, some talk about a multipolar world, and the world trading denoted in not only the USD but BRICS at the same time. I guess we're experiencing that right now. Do you see that continuing?
Well,
And is that a possibility for that to continue?
you can't really compare like trading USD to trading in BRICS because there is no BRICS to trade in. BRICS is a trading
Okay.
block of countries. So what currency would you trade in with the BRICS? Right now, it's still the USD. But will it be renminbi, rand, rupee, ruble? Off the top of my head, out of all the currencies in the BRICS, there's not one stable currency that I would put my, faith in. The strongest currency, without looking at it, researching or doing any analysis, will probably be the renminbi. And the renminbi is by far not strong. The renminbi is used outside of China because China attempts to force it by making very deals that seem very appealing. But if you take a look at them over a course of time, at least in the African and Caribbean nations, those deals are horrible. Okay. Kenya took an Chinese financing instrument to build an international port and use Chinese labor as one of the terms of the Chinese financing instrument. And I have nothing against China at all. Okay. This is not a political comment. This is purely economic observation. One of the biggest advantages of making a large infrastructure project or building a large infrastructure project is the employment. So you don't make a deal with a foreign country, a sovereign entity, and you take financing from them, and that financing that you take from them is not denominated in your own currency. Mistake number one. Okay. And then mistake number two, to have one of the terms of that financing deal to use that foreign entity or that foreign sovereign nation's citizens as employees. You're giving away much of the economic benefit. Okay, so you put a lot of Chinese people to work in Kenya. You put a lot of the Kenyan shillings shoved offshore, right, to China, denominated in renminbi. Kenya defaulted. China took ownership of the port, and now China owns the largest international port in Kenya. Exactly what did Kenya get out of that deal? Nothing.
No.
Flames from hell, basically. And that's
Yeah,
not the only
that
example, you know.
yeah, that happens very commonly here in the U.S. Just my own personal experience here in Oklahoma with big corporations coming in and have stolen farmers' land and property by doing that. By that you get a contract with them, but you're getting your animals from them and the feed, and you're selling that back to them. So
Right.
you're like shopping at your boss's store, and that never works out for the farmer.
With
So
your
that
boss's
sounds like
expense
that's
account,
happening.
but you have to pay the interest on
Yes,
it. So, yeah.
right. Wow, that's heartbreaking.
Just remember,
Definitely
diversify.
not.
Diversify. If you get something
Mhm.
from one source, make sure everything else you get it from different sources that are unrelated to that source. The Kenyan deal was, and I wonder, like, was the contract written in Mandarin? Because, it's just, it seems nonsensical, but it happened very
Mhm.
often, not just with Kenya. Now the nations, a lot of the African nations are pushing back some, but they're doing it in the Caribbean nations. I hear they've done it in the other Asian nations, such as I believe Pakistan, and if I'm not mistaken, Eastern Europe may be going through that as well. You can go to the greedy, private equity funds in the U.S. and you can get ripped off. You can get ripped off for free. It's not really for free; it's a joke. But um, I think that the terms would be better if you went to you know, the private American money, and that they're going to try and bend you over. That's the business model.
Rip you off. Wow. So in an effort to turn this around and make something positive out of it, here in the U.S., there's been more than 23 states have made gold and silver legal tender. Texas recently is working they have a bill establishing a gold-backed digital currency. Um, there were some rumors that there's an idea that, states like Texas, not Texas specifically, but states could do talks with other countries similar to BRICS, or countries that are willing to have their own gold-backed digital currency and do trades independently. Do you see that as some future or possibility of a transition away from the debt-based system, or this uh, system that where it seems like all these decisions get made where we the people seem to be on the losing end?
Well, I don't know the laws and the rules regarding how states contract directly with other nations. I'm sure
Mm,
they can and do. I'm almost positive. But as for Texas and trying to get rid of a debt-based system, Texas subsists and exists because of the debt-based system. If Texas were to get rid of the debt-based system, we'd be getting rid of Texas, and that's not in Texas's
oh,
best interest. So I doubt very seriously they might want to get rid of portions of the debt-based system that benefits their competitors. But if we were to eliminate the debt-based system, Texas will be one of the first ones. And it's not just Texas, the United States in general. You have to understand the United States is not the leading economic, militaristic, and geopolitical force because they're nice and have never done anything wrong. Um, I'm trying to think. For roughly 400 years, the U.S. Subsisted and excelled from chattel slavery and free labor. Okay, you had basically a debt-based system there. They just never paid their debts. Okay, and that's the slaves, and that's slavery. And slavery went from indentured servitude to the Chinese slaves to the African slave trade, which was basically an institution that lasted at the minimum of 400 years. Um, Moving forward, when they first got here, taking lands from the Native Americans, uh, you know, the history of either taking what didn't belong to them without compensation or
mhm.
creating something that didn't exist without proper collateralization, and then multiplying that in perpetuity is what the United States was based upon. You fake it until you make it, and once you make it, then you decide, you know, what is collateral, what is money, and what is not. I just can't see, Texas saying let's eliminate the debt-based system. So you're going to rejigger your state taxes, and what are you going to do for sales tax, etc. It's the pot calling the kettle black, if you understand. I'm not picking on Texas as a state because almost every
No,
other
I
state
brought
does
that
the same
up
thing. Yeah,
just as them being a leader in the, the gold-backed digital currency, taking those steps. So that was me bringing that up. I know you don't have much time. I wanted to kind of close this out with trying to stay on a positive note. Today is the 60th anniversary of Martin Luther King's famous speech, "I Have a Dream." And so as we're hearing all this, chaos in currency, we know that you do hold the IP for Veritaseum, and it does seem like the truth in transacting with one another. What is your dream for the Veritaseum IP?
Well, my dream was to allow it to create a direct connection, a direct bridge between uh, participants in the markets and the markets themselves. So that 11-year-old girl in Sri Lanka, and that can trade corn and maize better than any commodity trader on Goldman Sachs. That 9-year-old Wiz in Abuja, Nigeria, can compete directly with, the financial engineering wizards in Chicago. Uh, the girl from Texas, okay, who doesn't come from the background that anybody on the big East Coast schools or UCLA or MIT, sits there her little cell phone because can't afford a computer, and she runs through everybody because she can get a direct connection to the markets. That's why the richest continent in the world is simultaneously the poorest continent, because all the wealth beneath the surface, right, is pilfered by colonizers and then taken over to the global markets and sold by them, and they benefit from it. If Africa could sell directly to the global markets, Africa would be wealthy. You could take Africa and you erase it and replace it with almost any name. You have parts of Central Europe and Eastern Europe. You have parts of South America. You have parts of Australia, where you just don't have direct connections to the markets. That was my dream. My new dream is I wish everybody would just leave me alone and stop fight me and just let me, do business in my life. That's the new dream. But if I
Your
get
dream
that
was let him.
fulfilled, then I would definitely, get the other dream going.
Well, we hope you have many days of walking your dog in peace, and we're grateful for all of it. But thank
And
you
I
for
have
your
two
time
dogs
and
because I
feedback.
foolishly bought my daughter a dog several years ago, and I guess I didn't count. Well, she goes off to college, and who's stuck with the dog? So this is advice. It's not financial advice. If you
Yeah,
buy your school-age daughter a dog, remember she may go off to college, and you have two dogs, okay, and a cat involuntarily. Just so that you
there
know.
you go. You just need a goldfish, and you'll be set. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Reggie. And thanks to all of you that are watching. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave us your comments below, and join the community in the Telegram channel. We always make sure to reach it out to you guys before we do these videos and ask Reggie for comments and questions from you all from the community. So thanks again and have a very good day.